Thanks for tuning in. You are listening to the 5-Star Brain Software Podcast with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. And this is episode 123, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. So if you're interested in hypnosis, self-development, or NLP, you've found what you're looking for. Today, we're talking all about insomnia and how to make it go away. So stay tuned and stay awake.
Hey Chris, when is this darn storm going to end? It's been going on for years now.
It's not ending, Mike. Not in your lifetime and certainly not in mine. Listen to that wind picking up. There's more trance outside the lighthouse than you can shake a script at.
Yeah, it's blustery, that's for sure, Chris, but do you know what puzzles me most about all of this?
What's that, Mike?
I'm always wondering, in the midst of this storm, whatever happened to that old tranquility we used to know?
These are days of victory, Pouch.
Yes!
Oh, we are here and we are amazingly ready for an amazing, fun podcast. And do you know what's weird? There's no way for me to introduce you written into it. So we just
started
changed
differently.
It up.
Yeah, we started with me just talking to you. Now we're doing double reference, talking about the reference.
It's very meta, Mike. Okay, let's get right into it. We are going to talk about a couple of things before we get started.
But we'll be fair and quick.
Yes, we will. Wizard School is coming up very soon in Toronto, Canada. It is a one weekend, that's 2 days, of hypnotic awesomeness taught by this man, Mike Mandel. All about all kinds of cool stuff that hypnotists want to learn.
Yeah, I want to show people how to really clear up trauma, how to clear up stuff in the past. We're going to teach you a number of different methods so that, you know, you're not just stitching up a wound that's damaged, a broken leg or something with a compound fracture. You're removing the shrapnel first before you stitch it up. Otherwise, you're just locking the problem down.
So that is going to be amazing on the 27th and 28th
And then
of
it's
April.
my birthday on the 29th.
But make sure you go to MikeMandelHypnosis.com/events for all the details, because there's all kinds of stuff. We got Wizard School. We've got our June Architecture of Hypnosis, which is starting to fill up. Basically, every week that goes by, more and more people are signing up, so there will not be open spots for much longer. And then we are in Vegas in August. We highly encourage all of you who are interested in hypnosis, whether you're brand new or experienced. It's an amazing conference put on by our friends Scott Sandlin and Richard Clark.
You got to tell Chris, it's the best hypnosis conference in the world. Hypnothoughts Live.
Yes.
Come to Las Vegas and hang out with us and hang out with amazing, amazing trainers. You'll have the time of your life.
Check out their website, which is htlive.net for that show. And then after the August show ends, we're heading to London in November.
Yes.
And that's going to be fun because we are going to teach Wizard School. We're going to teach Mindscaping. And we're going to do, I think you've got a 1 hour or 2 hour lecture during the conference itself.
I better start thinking about it.
So that's on our events page. And that is the UK Hypnosis, is it convention or conference? Convention. So check that out.
Adam Eason, our other friend.
And with
Carl Smith will be there too.
With that said, it is time to move on to today's show.
Well, let me go with the think words of the day. We've done something different today. We always generate the words of my think tank. And when I was getting the show notes together, I thought I'd do something different. Like Edward de Bono, when he was talking about using the think tank, he said, you get in mind he wrote the book on the think tank as well as lateral thinking. He said that when you have a problem or an issue or something you just want to create, whatever your purpose is, think of the purpose. Now that's interesting. It's bringing it to the forefront of your mind. And then he said to use the think tank to generate the random words. But we've only been using one word, and he's using like 5 or 6 in the book. So we're going to compromise. From now on, we're going to do 3 think tank words every time.
So we've
see how they all pollinate each other.
Immediately made this podcast 200% more effective.
It's spoken like an engineer.
I just want to say, when people say 300% more effective, that's wrong.
No, they can say 300% as effective.
Yeah,
See,
sure.
It's
true. You cannot say that when you triple something, it is not a 300% improvement.
Correct.
It's a 200% improvement. Doubling is 100%. Okay, there you go. Math out of the way. Math lesson, folks. All right. So what are our 3 words, Mike?
Well, the first one is barrel. The second is castor, and C-A-S-T-O-R, not E-R. And the third one is belief. And these actually did come out of the think tank. So we're going to go with what we get. That's the whole point. So what do you get from this?
Barrel. Barrel. Well, You could, oh, you know what? Okay, I want to say barrel is a big container, a big container to put something in, but also, you know, people say, well, I had him over the barrel.
Okay, at a disadvantage.
Or, you know, that's it. So you do not want to be over the barrel in life. You do not want to be at a disadvantage. You want to have brain software to make your life awesome.
That's interesting. Now, Caster, of course, I think Ant-Proof Casters.
Ant-Proof,
right away, the Shiz Jig
our sponsor, the Shiz Jig Corporation.
Yeah, that's true. Now, how do you tie the two together?
Barrel and caster. Well, okay. So now things have completely changed. If I have a very heavy barrel with lots of stuff in it and I need to move it somehow, I want to put wheels on it.
Oh, that's
nice.
I want
to make it easy.
So let's make those heavy tasks as easy as possible. Remember, barrel can also mean you barrel in on someone,
yes.
You barge in. So we're talking about making a heavy task easier, so to avoid being over the barrel. And now we bring in belief, and I find this interesting because years ago I had a discussion with another NLP trainer, and he said he didn't believe that beliefs were important.
And did you ask him if he really believes that?
Do you really
believe that?
That's the
natural
true
response.
And, well, our beliefs are going to affect everything because they're going to change our perceptual filters. What we let in into our unconscious, what we let into our lifestyle, what we let into our activities. So let's adopt some serious beliefs of what kind of future we can create. And then we won't be over the barrel. We can make things go smoothly. And let's start with this podcast.
All right, awesome. So speaking of smooth, let's talk about well, this is a podcast about sleep.
Right.
Insomnia, which we want to help you turn into quality sleep. Remember, insomnia is the problem. It's not the desired state, right? Nobody wants to have insomnia. We all want to have great quality sleep, so at least we hope you want. So let's adopt a belief that it will be easy to take this big barrel full of crap that has been dragging down the quality of your sleep.
Slap some casters on it
and slide it out of the way.
And I believe y'all going to be free of the insomnia.
All
now,
right.
This is interesting. Chris and I want you to know, as always, we're not medical doctors. If you have medical conditions, go to your doctor, go to your primary health care practitioner, and talk to your doctor about this. But we're just giving some ideas. This is education. These are the things that we have found help us. So you're getting our opinions today. But we like to look at sleep as being a nutrient. That's a really interesting frame. We think of food as nutrients, but how many people think of water as a nutrient? Probably not, because it's really just, you know,
it is
water.
It's
but you die without it.
Yeah,
and you die without air.
Yeah, it's technically water is not a macronutrient because that's fat, carbohydrate, and protein, and it's not a micronutrient like, you know, chromium, magnesium.
Right, but because it's essential to life,
it is essential to life, so we'll call it a nutrient
in our framework.
And in the same vein, sleep is a nutrient, right?
Notice I stopped talking just so you could fit those words in. So
I know, thank you. So we're not talking over each other too much.
Just the right amount.
By the way, I just want to acknowledge that we got another email from our friend Lance in Toronto, and he said, by the way, you guys must talk over each other, and you should damn well promote your own stuff because you're not promoting anything else on the podcast. That, you know, it's your show. You should be able to promote your own stuff.
And
okay,
Chris dealt with it by hurling colorful abuse at him.
No, I said
thank you,
Lance. I think you're right. You're right. Let's talk over each other some more.
We see it as a nutrient, the same way we see air as a nutrient. We've got to breathe. And the same way sleep is a nutrient, because without it, you're going to die. So we've dealt with all the chemically it isn't, but
it's a good metaphor.
You know, when you are sleep deprived, everything in your life suffers. It sucks. In fact, if you wake up with an alarm, you are sleep deprived. If you can get into a routine so you don't wake up with an alarm, that's great. But when you wake up with an alarm, I can prove you're sleep deprived because you were asleep until this went off. In other words, you had not yet had enough sleep, right?
Again, if you think of most things in your body being controlled unconsciously, you know when to eat because you get hungry. You know when to go to the bathroom because you feel that full bladder feeling or whatever it is, right? You know when you're thirsty and that you should drink water. Well, your body knows when to fall asleep and it knows when to wake up. So if you were sleeping and a loud noise awakens you, like your alarm clock,
pounding
in our case, our barking puppy, he hears any little sound, the tiniest of sounds in midnight, 2 a.m, and he just...
Wait, because he's a good watchdog. That's why,
and I just did that, realizing he's probably going to hear me upstairs.
Of course, and then he'll wake up.
Start barking. But point being, Mike is absolutely right. If you are waking up to an alarm clock, then you're sleep deprived. But, Mike... People have jobs. They have to wake up. Let's say, and I want to.
We're talking in a perfect world.
Let's take a quick step back and remind you, very big picture. We've said this before on the podcast years and years ago, before we started working together full time. I said, oh, I have to leave the pub now after our jiu-jitsu class. I have to wake up at 5:30. It's this, I have to put on my suit and tie and go to my big corporate job because I'm important. Oh, guys, I have to leave. I have to wake up at 5:30. Mike looked at me and said,
choice you made.
Choice you made. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's so right. But it's not even choice I made. It's choice I'm making.
Continuously making, yeah.
And so I changed my lifestyle. Not saying that you're necessarily going to do that. Maybe, let's say you run a medical clinic and you love what you do. And as a result of that, it requires waking up at 6:30 in the morning so you can do all the things that you need to do to get to your clinic on time. And you're helping people and you're totally fulfilled. You're just not quite getting enough sleep. Okay, so you're still going to want to use an alarm clock, right? As a backup plan.
For sure, yeah.
But there's no rule saying you can't adopt your pre-sleep ritual, use some self-hypnosis so that you're most of the time going to wake up around the same time that alarm is going off.
And the way you're going to wake up at the same time is by as much as you can. I pity people on shift work. I've done it. I know how hard that can be. But ideally, you want to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. Your body will get into that groove.
Into a routine.
And you're doing 90 to 100 minute sleep cycles. And during that, you're starting, in your waking state, the first sense to shut off is, of course, visual because your eyes are shut.
Right.
The last one to go is the auditory sense. So things that you're hearing in your room as you're in a hypnagogic state, drifting into sleep in the state that is akin to hypnosis. Background sounds can work their way into your dreams. Likewise, when you're in a hypnopompic state coming out. But during this time, you will dip through alpha, which is the same state as daydreaming, just below the threshold of wakefulness. That's where you get your dreams. That's where the rapid eye movements are. People tend to think, oh, I was in a deep sleep with all these dreams. No, you bobbed up to the surface to get the dreams. In the deep sleep, when you're down in delta, 2 to 4 hertz, you're not dreaming anything. That's a physical healing place to be. Mm-hmm. But if we are deprived of delta, we get sick. And if we're deprived of alpha, the ability to have dreams, if you're taking human Givens theory into account, Chris, and believe that
you can't resolve your emotions from the day before.
You cannot resolve negative emotions or even just an overload of emotions. They say that sleep and the rapid eye movement in the alpha state will depotentiate all that's built up from the previous day, so you're starting with a clean slate. Now, here's how important this is. If you're deprived of these things, you'll start hallucinating in your day-to-day life.
Oh, man.
I've had that experience. A bunch of friends and I, when we were very young, 12 or 13, we discovered poker, just with poker chips, and we got addicted to it, and we didn't really know how to play it. We sort of created our own rules. And anyway, we played so much, and we stayed up so much. The sleep deprivation, I can remember sitting there playing and feeling like I wasn't even in the room anymore. It just, my brain was completely messed up from sleep deprivation. All this to say, my mom told me that during the war years, when Britain was undergoing the Blitz, when she was in Manchester, she still had to be at work every morning. The air raid siren would go off night after night. Now, you imagine, Chris, you got to get down to the underground station if you're in London.
You got
to get to a bomb shelter. Yeah. She said you got so physically tired because the keep calm and carry on was real. You're expected to be at work for the war effort. She said she remembers the air raid siren going off and hearing the buzz bombs coming over and saying, I just want to die in my own bed. Not even getting out of bed to go to a bomb shelter because she was too tired. So sleep deprivation can make you forget to avoid bombs.
It can cause you to make some very weird decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can.
Okay, so we're gonna move on. Now, what is this here?
Well, I've got there's two types.
Oh, right. We have to talk about the 2 types of insomnia.
Dealt with this a lot. There's 2 basic types of insomnia. The first one is the difficulty initially falling asleep.
Right. So this is I've decided to go to bed now. It's 11 o'clock, let's say, and I lie there
till 12:30 and then fall asleep. And that's very, very unpleasant.
Yes.
And we'll get to more detail on this one. And there's a very specific treatment for this that Bandler came up with that I love. The second one is the 3 a.m. type. This is the one where you're fast asleep and you just 3 a.m. around there, you suddenly realize. Have you ever had this, Chris?
It can be any time, but it's usually
typically around there. Where
you
just suddenly realize not only are you awake, but you're wide awake.
Oh, totally.
I hate it.
I've had that plenty of times in my life, and it's usually when there's a lot going on in my brain, right?
That's it. And the danger is you'll start running stuff in your brain.
Yep. And it can be a challenge depending on your motivation. If you really want to resolve let's say the stresses or the decisions that you have to make or whatever it is, You don't want to
Right.
fall back to sleep. You actually want to resolve these things. And it may be for a period of time beneficial to have that type of insomnia, but it's certainly not a good thing to have as a chronic problem.
No, it isn't. And in fact, I've found that sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm absolutely wide awake, I've learned instead of lying there, I get up and I read for an hour.
Yeah.
I get away from the bedroom and everything, put the fire on, read for a bit, and then go back to bed, and I can typically fall asleep. Rather than lie awake doing nothing, I thought, well, I've been given an hour. At least I can read something worthwhile.
Totally makes sense. Okay, so we're going to talk
Let's talk about Erickson and his insomnia cure.
Oh, go for
the
it.
Johnson
yeah.
wax.
Oh.
Remember Erickson, the classic
This
story?
is in, what book is this in?
Might be in the purple book. One of the
Okay.
purple books.
All right.
I'm
Well,
looking
we're
at
not
them
sure.
now.
We're not
Yeah.
sure, so we'll move along as if we never brought that
Yeah,
up.
we'll edit that part out. So, Milton Erickson, the greatest hypnotist of all time, in our opinion, and we are right. Erickson talked about a client, a patient, because he was a psychiatrist, a patient who came in with bad insomnia. And Erickson said, I want you to get a can of Johnson floor wax and some old rags. And when you go to bed, if you see it's 11 o'clock, after 11 o'clock on your clock, you have to get up and wax the floor all night on your hands and knees and then go to work.
An ordeal.
An ordeal.
Yeah.
And these people would do these things because he had such authority and he was a very, very good psychiatrist. He'd get people to do these crazy things like trim his rose bushes and curse them the whole time they were doing it. And they're paying him for treatment, but they get better. So the guy gets up. He looks at the clock. It's like 6 minutes after 11. Oh, no. So he goes and waxes the floor all night, polishes it with hands and knees in agony, goes to bed exhausted. Does this a couple of nights. The third night, I don't know, it's early in the evening. He said, I think I'm just going to rest my eyes for a couple of minutes. Wakes up and it's morning.
Yeah.
And Erickson said this guy would keep the Johnson floor wax on the bedside table with the rags. And if he saw that time was after 11 p.m., he'd have to get up and wax the floor. And that pretty well broke the pattern. It cured it. He used the pattern of lying awake and institutionalized it, made it the method he had to use.
Right. Prescribing the problem.
But no, well, here's where we're going to go with the rest of this. Chris and I were talking about, let's talk about the agitators.
Okay, yeah.
The things that make insomnia worse and eliminating them. They're going to show you some ways to improve it so you can do some self-treatments with your doctor's permission, of course.
So remember, those of you who've been listening to this podcast for a while know that Mike and I are big fans of away from and towards motivators. So you want to move away from the problem state. We're going to talk about eliminating the agitators, those things that make insomnia worse, and moving towards the helpers, the things that make sleep better. All right.
All right, well, let's talk about screen exposure because we are designed to sleep when it gets dark and wake up when it gets light. In fact, if you have to wake up with an alarm, I've never tried these, but I've heard great results from people who have. They've reported great results.
The sunrise
sun
type
alarm,
of
yeah,
alarms, yeah.
where the actual alarm comes on as a light and gets brighter and brighter in the spectrum of sunlight. So you just wake up naturally because the sunlight through your closed eyelids switches off the melatonin, which keeps you asleep, and switches on serotonin to start waking you up.
If I was waking up with an alarm, I would absolutely want one of those. I do not wake up to an alarm, so I have no interest in buying one. But I would definitely give it a shot.
I thought of a great idea for people who hit the sleep switch on their clock. Of course, when I have to wake up with an alarm like today, I have
you mean the snooze button when they hit the snooze?
Yeah. So I meant that. Yeah. So I have my iPhone across the room, so I have to actually get out of bed. I can't hit the snooze button, which is good. So I thought, when I was a kid, young, I thought I could come up with the ultimate clock to wake you up where you would never hit the snooze button, ever. It's a cube, and it's got padded corners. It was about 6 inches, 7 inches square, and it weighs about 3 or 4 pounds. I had a Sony clock radio that looked like that.
Okay.
And it comes with a shelf, a small shelf. The shelf fits over the head of your bed, and the clock is plugged in there. The alarm goes off, and when it does, a mechanism begins winding a leg out of the bottom of this clock.
Oh, so that's going to
30 seconds,
tilt and
it
fall
tilts
on your
and
head.
falls on your head. Actually falls, hits you in the face. You'd think you'd hit the snooze button after that. And the beauty is it's padded, so even if you throw it across the room or something, it's still going to be good to go the next day.
That is so funny.
Let's patent it. You heard it here first.
That is brilliant. Okay.
Talk about screen time.
All right. So screen time, people recommend that you stop looking at a screen, let's say a couple of hours, maybe an hour before bed. For me personally, I don't mind reading some news on my iPad or something like that before I go to bed, but I do use the night mode setting of iOS.
I was going to say.
It takes the blue light away.
Right.
And so this is all just suggestions that we're giving you. These are all. And you have to calibrate your own response. It doesn't bother me personally to look at a screen in general, but it does bother me to, let's say, watch an action movie or something like that. I'm not going to have a good night's sleep right after watching some heavy drama
about it.
or
You're
something like
flashing
that.
light. You're overstimulating the visual cortex, and that keeps you awake. You want to switch into a kinesthetic system, the feeling system, which is what we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. But yeah, going to that night mode where you're eliminating much of the blue end of the spectrum is important, because that is the part of the spectrum that will keep you awake. It keeps the melatonin switched off, and it starts to get the serotonin flowing, so you're awake and alert, which is what you don't want to be when you go to bed.
Right. So switch on night mode on your iPad, iPhone, or if you have an Android. I'm not sure what the feature is called. I'm not an Android user, but look it up, see if you can solve that problem, or just put the device away at least an hour before bed.
Well, you know, Chris, I got also what you said about news. I don't think it's a good idea to expose yourself to news at bedtime. You know, people
not news that's going to make you emotional. I'm talking more content that I am interested in. So, for example, I love reading about Tesla, electric cars, technology. I love reading about fitness and health, kind of things like that. They're not going to drive big emotional responses. You're not going to be watching
war and terrorism and horrible things happening to kids.
Exactly.
Who could put that in their head at bedtime?
It's personal interest topics for me.
So, so you get the screens out. In fact, just to put a nail in this coffin, one more point on this. When I read at night, I have down by the fireplace, I have a chairside lamp, and it actually has two settings. It's LED, but I can touch it, and it will either be really blue, or if I touch it, it goes to more of an orangey color.
Right.
So it changes the spectrum. So even
so you want to use that orangey one when you're about to go to bed. The blue one maybe is first thing in the morning or daytime.
Let's talk about hidden caffeine.
All right.
I've found...
so caffeine is a stimulant.
Yeah.
Caffeine's not a good idea before you're going to bed, and it's probably not a good idea. My kid, for example, my daughter's 14, and we will not let her have any coffee. She likes to have coffee in the morning. None after noon.
Yeah, no, my wife is the same. If my wife has 2 cups of tea in the morning, it will give her insomnia that night.
Wow.
She's so sensitive to caffeine.
So you've got to know your own sensitivity. But we're talking here about caffeine that's hidden in things you wouldn't necessarily think.
Well, tea has theine in it, which is chemically identical to caffeine, but it also has muscle relaxants in it. So tea is the strange beverage that's calming as well as stimulating, but I still wouldn't want it at bedtime. And chocolate, there's another one.
Chocolate has caffeine in it, absolutely, the cocoa bean.
If you're having a slab of even dark chocolate before bed because you want to get the antioxidant effect, you are putting caffeine in your system. And again, over time, you're going to develop a reduced sensitivity to caffeine. So I can have my, couple of mugs of coffee in the morning, 2 large mugs of coffee, and I can have something else when I come over here, another cup. But I'll probably stop then, because I know if I push it to another one, then I'm going to have difficulty sleeping. So it's kind of common sense.
Absolutely. Another one is there any other hidden sources of caffeine you want to mention?
Not as far as I know.
Okay, so we're going to move on to alcohol. Alcohol of all kinds. And of course, keeping in mind, Mike and I are huge fans of alcohol, right?
What?
I'm just kidding.
I'm sitting here baffled with what you're saying.
I was wondering.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a joke. No, Mike and I, we enjoy, specifically, we both like to drink red wine like a lot of people do.
And as Chris continues to dig the grave even deeper.
It is a very bad idea to have a bunch of red wine right before you go to bed. So if you're a red wine drinker, or any alcohol at all, really, it's a better idea to have it earlier in the evening, not right before you go to bed, because it will screw up it'll actually affect your heart rate, it'll affect your blood sugar,
and the
your
reason
metabolism.
why, red wine contains tannins, white wine doesn't really. And red wine tannins from the peel and so on, and even the stems that are found in the vats, tannins are related chemically to histamine. So you're getting almost a full body histamine release, which causes inflammation and can keep you awake. My friend Tony Aspler, who's one of Canada's greatest wine experts, he said, if people are bothered by this, if you know you're going to be drinking red wine at a friend's house or something and it keeps you awake, you either switch to white and find out that you were right, you're sleeping fine, or take a single aspirin before you go to bed.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
So the anti-inflammatory effect should do it for you. This is not prescribing, it's Tony Aspler.
So generally speaking, though, when it comes to moderate alcohol consumption, just keep it away from the bedtime hours.
Right. I mean, you can have a couple of glasses of wine, but or a couple of scotches or whatever. But the problem is, if you have beyond a couple into many, you're destroying your sleep pattern as well. Your brain won't go through the proper sleep cycle.
Yeah, and I'm sure, excuse me,
Sure, it's
most
happened to you
people
many
listening
times. It's not
have
listening.
probably had the experience where, they've gone to a neighbor's house for a party on a Friday night or something and had much more alcohol than they would normally drink. Then when they go to bed, they have a horrible night's sleep. And of course, they know it was the alcohol, right? It affects it. So
I've
just
never had
keep
that happen
all
to
of
me.
this in mind when you're evaluating the things that are agitating your sleep. Just make a laundry list of the things that you need to fix in your life, and that might be one of them.
That's a good one. Good point,
Next
Chris.
one.
Excitotoxins. Excitotoxins are very unusual chemical compounds that cause the brain's neurons to overstimulate, actually to the point of exploding. It can cause neurons to fire so frequently and so fast and so hard that they actually die off.
Oh, that is so weird.
It's terrifying. Look it up, excitotoxins. And the two most common are MSG, monosodium glutamate, and aspartame. Now, MSG is hidden in all kinds of processed foods. You'll see it's called hydrogenized soy protein or all these different names, but it's actually there. And, they used to sell a product called Accent, which was pure MSG. And it was Accent, adds flavor to your food. It didn't affect the food. It affected your taste and your brain and made the food taste better. But it would cause some people to have what they call Chinese restaurant syndrome. Because in the early days of restaurant meals, a lot of Chinese restaurants would buy MSG in like 40-pound bags. I know I've seen them, and would scoop it into all the food because it makes it taste better.
Okay.
But that's why, you want to go somewhere like Mandarin where it says no MSG.
And we're talking about the American version of Chinese food here. The typical, order out.
Yeah, the sort of the fast version of Chinese food.
Yeah.
But
it's probably not the way real Chinese food is.
But this can keep you awake. It can overstimulate your brain. People were getting Chinese restaurant syndrome and getting, red faces and so on from it, and a flushed feeling. Some people would feel itchy. And there'd been attempts to say, oh, this isn't real because your brain has, as Dr. Wang said, buckets of glutamate in it. You've got tons of glutamate because it's a neurotransmitter in your brain. But that's not the right answer. And here's why. It's like saying chlorine isn't toxic because you can eat salt, and salt has all kinds of
sodium chloride.
It's when you make it monosodium glutamate, then it has this effect.
The chemistry matters. Just the atom itself is not the problem. It's the way that it interacts with other atoms. It's always interactions, right? So
thank you, Captain
the
Science.
chemistry matters. And I'm not claiming to understand every little bit of this stuff.
Well, we're glad to hear that, buddy.
Speaking of excitotoxins,
aspartame.
Aspartame. Yeah, so things like Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, any kind of diet drinks that are often made with
those are
aspartame.
excitotoxins, and it's again, I'm not telling you to stop drinking Diet Pop.
I'm
not telling you to stop drinking soda pop. I'm not telling you to stop putting poison in your body. I would never tell you that. It's your choice.
Okay, so speaking of which, that fits into the category of things that you eat, right? Diet-related things. So let's jump down our list and talk about carbohydrates briefly.
Go for it.
Because one of the things that Mike and I really believe is a good idea is to make your diet consist of actual food. Food that people, let's say if they were to come back from 100 years ago and look at what you're eating now, they would go, oh yeah, that's a potato. Not that we're necessarily pushing potatoes on people, but people from 100 years ago would go, yeah, I know what that is. They wouldn't necessarily understand, I don't know, let's say the Twinkie.
Right, yeah.
Or the Tim Hortons donut, Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, for sure.
Donut,
Yeah,
apple
any of these
fritters,
things.
these things. So
even these packaged meals.
Craft dinner, which my grandmother used to call Crappy Craft. And, you wanted Crappy Craft for lunch?
That's what my grandmother called it, too.
Really?
No, Chris. She died in England years ago. Never met her.
These horrible, mac and cheese, all these fake foods
Delicious,
that are not real, that's where you're going to get your MSG, your aspartame, right? It's the same thing when it comes to carbohydrates. You do not want to load down your body with ultra-refined flours and
especially
sugars. At bedtime. Yes, especially at bedtime.
What
Generally,
happens?
But what'll happen, so Mike, you eat a big carbohydrate-rich meal, let's say a big bowl of pasta at 9 p.m. to go to bed at 10.
Yeah.
So now that pasta breaks down into glucose, right? That glucose gets carried in your blood, and your pancreas has to deal with it by releasing insulin so that glucose can be shunted into your muscle cells or into glycogen storage.
Blood glucose drops because of the insulin.
And then what happens
you
a few
wake
hours
up
later?
hungry at 3 a.m.
You hungry.
Yeah.
And that is, for the most part, that is going to be true with anyone on a so-called standard American diet, SAD, maybe you should consider changing that.
Interesting.
If you're on a high-carb diet, then when you eat a bunch of carbs before you go to bed, you're probably going to wake up
pizza.
hungry.
You know, it's interesting because Chris and I never say never again. You know, I had a pint of beer last night, this Spearhead beer that was made from pineapple. It was delicious. The brewery sent me some from this microbrewery. I had one, but I don't have many ever because I blowed up. I can't handle it now. My system doesn't like, and I'm not talking about Spearhead beer. I'm talking about beer in general.
Yeah.
It's delicious, but it makes me hold water. You've got to get used to what your own body knows and your own body does. Back to carbs for a second. Never say never again. When Michael C. Anthony came up, him and Paul Pacific and I always meet at the Flatiron Building when he's in town. We have an M3, Mentalist 3 meeting. You know what we had for lunch, Mike and I?
Let me guess. Pizza.
No, better. Listen to this. A toasted mac and cheese sandwich.
Oh,
with a side of fries.
That's
now,
disgusting.
It was mac and cheese baked, stuffed between two fatty slabs of bread with a lot of butter and cheese. And then I'm just drooling here.
That is a very
and a big side of fries.
combo.
This is insane. So that's why I do it once a year.
Yeah, that's
once
the thing.
Year.
We never say never because give yourself permission to break down once in a while, right? Just don't make it a habit. Anyway, so think about calibrating your carbohydrate intake, especially late at night, and if that's affecting your sleep.
And let's move along, boys and girls.
All right, stress.
Stress is the thing that makes everything worse.
Everybody's dealing with a variety of stresses in their lives.
It'll keep you awake if you're trickling adrenaline in your sleep, especially, you know, while you're trying to sleep. And let's even talk about this trying to sleep in concert with that. When we are stressed, instead of sleeping, we try to sleep.
Yeah.
And then we get the law of reverse effect.
I'm going to try to get a good night's sleep tonight, Mike.
Good luck with that. How's that working out for you? You know, it's interesting because I've documented, if you watch almost any hostage-taking movie, any Bruce Willis kind of film, there will always be a scene where someone's kidnapped, they don't know what's happened to them, or you know, they've got people holed up in a room, they're trying to get them out, and it's very tense, and there's negotiators and police and SWAT teams, and it's at night, and nobody knows.
To the family,
they'll always say to the family, try to get some sleep.
Try to get some sleep.
And you know, I know the line's coming up, and you know they're going to lie awake staring at the ceiling anyway.
Yeah, it's completely true. By the way, speaking of stress, this is probably a good time to mention if you visit MikeMandelHypnosis.com/stress7, our stress relief audio, which is normally $37, will be $7. So check it out. You might enjoy that. If stress is a part of your life, that is the most popular self-hypnosis recording that we have. It's a miniature vacation for your mind. It is very popular. People love it. All right.
Excellent.
So we've talked about the sleep.
We're going to now talk about the helpers, but let's get a word from our sponsors to divide this up.
All right. So we'll do our commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the helpers.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Beverly and Jeremy are a typical Kennebunkport couple. They have good lives, good jobs, and they eat good food. They own a beautiful home on Maine's windswept coast, but always dreamed of something more. Jeremy is obsessed with the Civil War, and Beverly would love to live in an antebellum mansion on Bayou Teche. So they save money, a lot of it, and still go into immense debt to purchase that special place of their dreams. They eventually find the gorgeous mansion they've wished for. It's a Louisiana Southern Belle with a huge veranda overgrown with fragrant bougainvillea flowers and a dead crabapple tree in the middle of their half-acre front lawn. All is going so well, but then disaster strikes. Beverly runs out of Chanel No. 5 and has to go into town to buy more. While she's there, she parks too close to a bus stop and is chided by a sheriff's deputy. Meanwhile, back at the antebellum home, Jerry is finalizing the papers for the house purchase in his office. Somehow, inexplicably, he staples his left testicle to the desk. His lawyer calls 911, and when the EMS arrive, they are unable to free his vas deferens from the desktop. So they decide to take the entire Chippendale desk to the hospital, with Jerry still attached to it, so the Chippendale desk can undergo descrotalization. Back in town, Beverly is sworn at by a teenage girl at the very moment that Jerry is undergoing an emergency deskectomy. and then driven home in a hearse just in case. But that night, something wonderful happens. Jerry is lying in bed, heavily tranquilized with a little white balloon on his head. Then, suddenly, amazingly, in a burst of fragrance, the crabapple tree blossoms into flower, and the little white balloon flies to the moon. Everything changes when the lawn tree blooms.
I looked out of my room. He looked out of his room. And the lawn tree blooms.
Yeah, the lawn tree blooms.
Yeah, the lawn tree blooms. And the lawn tree blooms. And the lawn tree blooms. And the lawn tree blooms. Gonna get there quite soon. Gonna get there quite soon. Gonna fly to the moon.
He's
with
gonna
a little
fly
white
to the
balloon.
moon.
And the lawn tree blooms. And the lawn tree blooms. And the lawn tree blooms. The Lawn Tree Blooms, tonight at 8 p.m. on the Jason Le Network.
Okay, Mike, let's continue then. We have to get through the helpers. So how do we move away from these agitators and towards these helpers? What are they?
Exercise is a big one at the beginning, Chris. I know in my own case, if I let stress build up and tension, if I'm not exercising at least 3 times a week, 3 good workouts a week, or even taking long walks, I don't sleep so well. If my wife and I go for long walks in the woods, go to farmer's market and continue in the woods, I sleep so much better.
I remember reading, was it Dr. David Ludwig's book, Always Hungry? And he talks about the Italians and the passeggia, the taking a walk after dinner. That's just very light exercise, right? But separately, I think if you look at what most people are missing in their lives in terms of leading an awesome life, diet, we've already talked about.
Yep.
But exercise is a huge one. Most people, unfortunately, live very sedentary lives these days. They don't get any exercise. So that, for most of you, excuse me. For most of you, I am guessing that you could probably add exercise to your life very easily, and it would be something new and something worth testing.
Yeah, that's interesting, too, because I remember being on multiple horrible, well, sometimes nice camping trips when I was a kid with my parents. And when we'd be outside playing, throwing Frisbee or swimming or whatever in the lake, my mom used to say, it's the fresh air. It makes you tired. So there's something in the air.
It's the exercise. The fresh air, I think, is just a confounding variable. It happens to go along with the fact that you were outside doing stuff all day long.
Confounding variable. Nicely put.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about, if people want to break the pattern of being awake when they go to bed, a good long warm bath, just soaking in the water, not, maybe quiet music playing or something. Change what you listen to at night too. And you can break the pattern of insomnia simply by having the nice warm bath for 20 minutes before you go to bed, dry off, and then go right to bed.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already talked about, in the very beginning, we talked about maintaining a regular schedule. So we probably don't need to beat that one to death. But
well, let's talk about napping.
Okay.
Now, this is very interesting because napping can go in 2 different categories. There's power napping, which can be a good thing. It can actually stop brain shrinkage and keep you at a higher level of intelligence, amazingly. A lot of studies seem to say. But if you nap for too long, you will completely screw up your sleep pattern.
Totally agree.
I take a nap, Chris knows, almost every afternoon. I've got a wife who understands that I need that, especially a man of my advanced age.
Usually, around 3 o'clock?
Between 2 and 3 it typically hits.
And probably, 25 minutes at the most?
20 minutes to half an hour, that's it. And I don't go to a deep sleep. I go in, but I do note I snore sometimes, and I get my Egyptian cat and pack him in with me like a hot water bottle in front of the fireplace. And if it's raining out, or I'll put on the sound of rainfall. Those sound generators can help you sleep so well, especially if tinnitus. If you have the sound of rainfall or waves or whatever is comforting to you, it can just be something wonderful to concentrate on. Now, if you do an afternoon nap for too long,
it'll mess you up. Yeah,
it's going to throw you off. It's like you don't want to nap after supper. It's like with our different audio tracks that we have with our products, like our stress relief and so on, we tell people don't use the hypnosis track after supper, like early in the evening. It's like taking a power nap before you go to bed, which is about the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, the end of the track basically says that you're going to come back feeling wide awake and alert. Well, maybe not a good idea to listen to at 10 p.m.
Right. Yeah, good idea. Because by that point, you're supposed to be slowing down.
Right.
You want your mind to slow down. You want, if you're listening to music, make sure it's not death metal at that time. Certainly not thrash metal. You don't have to be putting on Slipknot just before you fall asleep. Although earlier in the day would be perfectly appropriate in my estimate. But I listen to something quiet and start to slow my brain. I take the last hour to prepare for sleep. I'll have a time in mind. I'm typically in bed about 11 o'clock. I used to be a 2 a.m. guy. But 11 o'clock, I get my 8 hours. Let's talk about how many hours.
Yeah, I like to get 8 hours. I just find that I function really well on 8. Less than 8, I typically will feel crappy.
Same for me.
But it's different for everybody. Calibrate your own sleep patterns.
And you're waking up through the night anyway. You wake up at the end of every sleep cycle, but it's only for a few seconds. Usually you turn over. It's actually your nose that tells you to turn over.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
You have talked about this in the past. Something
the blood
to do
will
with
pull
your
to
nose.
one side of your nose. Your brain detects it and tells you it's time to turn over.
It's a very interesting thing. It's just like we mentioned earlier. Your unconscious will know when you're hungry, when you have to go to the bathroom, when you're thirsty, when you're tired. But yes, we get these urges to just, I want to turn to the other side now. That's really weird.
Well,
I want to talk about also, since you talked about setting a regular schedule and kind of having a ritual in terms of what you do before bed, one of the things that we want to remind you is it's a really bad idea to have a lot of light on. So lots of lights in your room. If you're affected by that, make sure that you have heavy blinds that you can close, or don't have LED lights.
And keep your room a little cooler rather than warmer.
Temperature. I'll tell you, since you and I, years ago, we recorded our A Good Night's Sleep product, and the first track is all about the kind of stuff we're talking about in this podcast. That's just a bit more formally recorded. But a lot of the same tips, and you talked about temperature and fresh air. And so from that point onward, my wife and I started leaving our window open a crack, even in winter.
Yep, just crack the window.
And
it's better.
It helps. It really does. So think about that.
My wife, when she was growing up, being the only girl in the family, she had her own room. The boys had to share. And she grew up in a bungalow, 7 people living in a bungalow. And so she got her own room, but she would keep the window shut and jam things under the door so no light was coming in. Wonder why she always woke up exhausted with a headache. She's not getting any fresh air all night.
Oh, yeah, that's
so
not good.
Let's quickly look at some of the substances you can take to help you sleep. Be careful with this. Again, we're not telling you to do this. We're just telling you these are things that we have used with great effect. Melatonin is a hormone, and it will not cause you to fall asleep, but it will help you stay asleep. If you're trying melatonin, I recommend you check with your doctor first because it is not regulated. You can buy melatonin over the counter. I do here in Canada. I'm sure you can in the U.S. You can get sublingual that dissolve under your tongue, absorbed intrabuccally. If I've been having a few nights of not sleeping great, I'll take melatonin an hour before I go to bed. And I'll find those are the nights I typically sleep right through. It's not something to do regularly, though. It is a hormone. And again, check with your doctor. The safer ones typically are the herbal preparations. You can buy different herbal teas by different companies at health food stores with combinations of things like skullcap and valerian and chamomile and hops. Even pure chamomile tea I find quite relaxing. These are things that have been used for centuries without ill effect. I will warn you about valerian though. People say, oh, it's chemically connected to Valium. It isn't at all, just the name's somewhat similar. Valerian is a really nice calming agent for 90% of people. For the other 10%, like me, it has the opposite effect. So I can take capsules or herbal teas or something, and if there's valerian in it, I won't take it now because it will actually have the opposite effect and wake me up. Some people, like my wife, are knocked out by it.
Okay, so there's just another example where you have to calibrate.
Yeah,
you can't just assume that because someone tells you this is going to help.
Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And again, you are responsible for your own health and you're responsible to do your due diligence. Calcium and magnesium. Earl Mandel wrote the Vitamin Bible. And he was interesting because he was a nutritionist and a pharmacist. Okay. And he said calcium and magnesium are nature's tranquilizers. And you really need them in 2-to-1 ratio, twice as much calcium. I don't take any calcium because I eat a ton of cheese, as you know, and I drink a liter of cream every week as part of my eating plan to keep my weight down. So I'm getting calcium, but occasionally I'll supplement with some magnesium before bed. And there's some great supplements out there for available magnesium that will help you relax at bedtime and sleep.
It's probably worth noting here that salt is a big controller of a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And while I can't claim to remember all of the details behind it, the author of the book that I recommend, and I know, Mike, you've read this too, a book called The Salt Fix.
Great book.
By Dr. James DiNicolantonio. This guy wrote the Bible on all things salt, and basically proves that you need to have sufficient salt in your diet.
You got 5 pounds of it in your body.
Yeah, it's really important. And this whole nonsense of, oh, make sure you take salt out of your diet to, help your blood pressure, blah, 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 blah. It's all bad science. And Dr. James DiNicolantonio did a great job, but it is kind of a master control. If I remember correctly, I think it's that salt, i.e. sodium, is a master control for calcium. And then calcium is a master control for magnesium. I think I'm getting that correct, but apologize if I'm getting it wrong. You can find podcasts where this guy is on the podcast talking all about this. So if you look him up, just go to the Salt Fix website, find the author's name, James DiNicolantonio, and then look for a podcast with him in it, and he will be talking all about this, and it's a fantastic topic.
A fascinating book.
So make sure you got enough salt in your diet, depending on whatever that is, and that might help your sleep too.
Do you know he's written a book with Jason Fung?
Yes, him and Jason Fung wrote a book together.
Toronto nephrologist. Let's continue though.
Okay.
What if you have trouble falling asleep? What if you have trouble getting back to sleep? Let's give you those two methods. First of all, the Richard Bandler cure for not falling asleep quickly enough. Bandler, as usual, got, say, 100 people who fell asleep immediately, like I do.
And say, what did you do?
And 100 people who lie awake for an hour, tossing and turning, eventually fall asleep. He said, what's the difference? He calibrated and unpacked this. He found out the people who lie awake flash bright colored pictures in their head, so you're stimulating the occiput, the visual sense, and comment on them internally in a rapid voice. Oh, I got to remember to get those airplane tickets. And I can book the car yet. I got this. And what am I going to do when it's on? Did I remember to shut that off? Is the Wi-Fi still on?
Yep.
All this stuff keeps you awake. He said the people who fall asleep quickly, like I do, get out of the visual system into the kinesthetic, the feeling system. Mm-hmm. They get the room cooler temperature. They get very cozy, maybe with a teddy bear curled up. And what happens is they shift their focus onto their physical body, slow down their internal voice into a sleepy voice, and talk about how cozy and wonderful.
You know what? You're reminding me. We talked about this last week, I think, when we were planning to do this topic. The idea that we are all suggestible is so easily provable. If you imagine
yawning,
I can often imagine that I'm looking at myself and that I'm seeing that other me needing to yawn, and I imagine it happening, and it's hilarious. I can go through a pattern where if I want to really fall asleep quickly and my brain just has not wound down yet, like on a Monday night after 2 hours of competitive volleyball, I get home, it's about 10:40 at night, let's say.
Yeah.
I take a quick shower because otherwise the sweaty is just gross.
Too much information.
Yeah, you have to just rinse all the sweat off.
Yes, you do.
Then I get in bed, I'm all comfortable, my muscles are stiff and starting to seize up, and my brain is still wound up from volleyball. Oh, man. But as soon as I start just imagining that other me in that dreamy state, yawning, it causes me to yawn.
Slow down the internal monologue.
It makes me laugh.
Focus on your physical body. Get comfortable. Now, what about if you wake up at 3 a.m.? You can use that method to get back to sleep. Or one of the others we're going to mention.
Any of these methods.
I'm a huge believer in Nux Vomica. Some of you are not really up on homeopathy, and a lot of you have been told that it's nonsense because you can eat a whole bottle of, Nux Vomica or something, as though that, but which is a straw man, because homeopathy predicts you'll be able to do that. It's very interesting because in Europe, homeopathy is mainstream. My brother-in-law went into a pharmacist where you can just get homeopathic drugs they'll give you instead of regular drugs as their first choice. He went in, he had strep throat. The doctor the pharmacist looks at his throat. Homeopathically, you give belladonna for strep throat. It's the classic symptom. He gave him a strep throat. He gave him a belladonna suppository.
Weird.
He says, go back to your hotel room, insert this in your rectum.
Oh.
So he did, and his strep throat disappeared. Anyway, it works. Look at the evidence. Look at Dana Ullman. I'm not going to argue it, but I will say, and Chris will verify this, one of our students in Toronto was an elderly gentleman from Eastern Europe, and he was the professor of chemistry at the University of Toronto, which is a very prestigious university, Banting and Best, Insulin, Jordan Peterson, Marshall McLuhan. Anyway, Chris talked about homeopathy. He said, but I can't understand the chemistry. And this guy said to Chris, that is because it is not chemistry. It works because of physics. But he was fully persuaded as a chemistry professor that it did work.
Very cool.
So we're not going to argue whether it works. I'm just saying Nux Vomica. also known as Colabrina, you can buy in a good health food store. I recommend the potency I take of 30C, like Charlie. And you take that, if you wake up at 3 a.m., a couple of those little pills under your tongue, and before long, it will be morning. Give it a shot. And of course, always check with your doctor. Chris, talk about self-hypnosis.
So self-hypnosis, just generally the idea that you can run your brain more effectively. You can do procedures. You can put yourself through these processes where you will fall into a nice, comfortable trance and segue it right into sleep. And basically, probably the easiest way, in my opinion now, after years and years of us talking about this stuff, I like the breathing with the eyes induction.
Nice.
You open your eyes, you breathe in slowly, and imagine that you're breathing in through your eyes. And then you close your eyes and you exhale. And I like the idea that you imagine that there are valves in your wrists and in your feet, and that the air is just,
this is Maxwell
relaxing
psycho-cybernetics from the 70s. Yeah.
Now, when you do this by simultaneously opening and closing the eyes simultaneously, when you do this rhythmically, like open your eyes, breathe in, close your eyes, breathe out, you're creating a fractionation. Not fractionalization, for those who are using the wrong words.
And not fractionalizationalism.
Yeah. We just got that. So you're fractionating. You're slowly slipping into a deeper and deeper trance. Now, once you've done that, I don't know, let's say 3, 4, 5 times, leave your eyes closed and simply shift into a kinesthetic sense.
Notice
so
how you feel.
Imagine that you're, you can pick whatever you want. You can say, I'm going to imagine that I'm lying in a comfortable hammock at that cottage, and it's almost nightfall, and it's warm on a July evening, and you can have those sensations and imagine the feelings, or you can actually just focus on what you're actually feeling. The blankets are surrounding me. I'm so comfortable. And then just allow yourself to go to sleep by continuing to do that. The trick is don't give up. Keep doing it. You will fall asleep.
Nice, nice. Well, I think we should leave people with one more technique because we're at the 50-minute mark.
Yes,
it's our
we
longest
are.
podcast
it
ever.
Is long.
We still got to finish it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the breathing focus, nostril temperature.
Oh, this is cool. You told me about this last week.
Yeah, I'd heard for years. Like I do some qigong, and I'm a martial artist, and I've heard for years, the importance
focus on your breathing.
Focus on your breathing. Focus on your breathing. Nobody tells you
what
how.
does that mean?
Yeah. Well, here's what it means. When you breathe in through your nose, and you always breathe in through your nose in yoga and out through your nose.
It gets a little bit cooler.
Notice it gets a little cooler around the edges of your nostrils. Just notice it. That's all. And when you breathe out, notice how your nostrils get a bit warmer. And that's it. Just keep bringing your mind back to noticing.
It's localized wind chill, ladies and gentlemen.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that works. It's
That's
a powerful
really
thing.
cool
And if you
idea.
want to make it even stronger, you can add one other technique, which is a single word meditation. Every time you exhale and notice the warmth in your nostrils, just say the word sleep in your mind. So you breathe in, feeling the cool, breathe out, and in your mind say sleep. And that'll do the trick.
Yeah. Folks, one last thing I want to mention
I
is
wanted to
that
say the last thing.
self-hypnosis is a skill. It is something you practice and you get better at, just like, if you're a card effect magician or a close-up magic guy or a hypnotist or a plumber or an electrician or a painter. It's a skill. The more you do it, the better you will get at it.
You got it. And so let's go to the empowering question, Chris. Take us away.
All right, here is today's empowering question. Since sleep is a nutrient, what will I do to ensure that I get adequate amounts of sleep? What will I do today to get enough sleep at night to be at my best all day?
Nice. To which I put the Meta 5 to nail the box shut. The Meta 5 today is the man who could sleep anywhere. And this was my father. My dad in the British Army. The war came to Britain. He didn't go overseas. He was overseas. And he was in the Royal Signal Corps. And he taught radio, as I mentioned with the 19-set story and other podcasts. But sometimes they had to be on sentry duty, even in England, just in case there were German paratroopers coming in out of the blue or out of the dark, because it would be at night. And on sentry duty, he had his Lee Enfield rifle and bolt-action rifle. And my dad would be so tired from the war, he'd have the rifle loaded. He'd set it in the corner of the sentry box at the base. He'd stand with his arms folded so his arms would lock. He'd lean in the corner with his helmet tucked down over his face, and he could sleep standing up. And he would sleep standing up for his entire shift as a sentry. And he maintained this ability his whole life. He used to come home for lunch, every day. At lunchtime, my mom would have a lunch waiting for him. He worked pretty close towards his latter years. And afterwards, he'd lie down on the couch. He'd make what he called a head sandwich. He'd put a pillow under his head and a pillow on his head. And he'd say to my mom, if I should happen to drift off, call me in 10 minutes. If you should happen to. And it was a huge joke. And in 30 seconds, he'd be snoring, literally snoring. And my mom would say, Ken, it's 10 minutes, get up. And he'd have his fingers sticking up from between the pillows, and he'd just waggle his fingers. He'd come to the surface just awake enough to move his fingers and then go back to sleep. And she'd say, stop bloody waving at me, Ken. Gets up, and he'd wave his fingers. Eventually, he'd have to break open the head sandwich, and he'd get up and go back to work refreshed. I have that ability. God be eternally praised. Every afternoon, I have that little nap. But I don't have it the ability that I could stand up in a sentry box and protect my home that way.
You have the little nap, but do you have the little white balloon? All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This has been episode 123 of the Brain Software Podcast. I'm Chris Thompson, and that in the other microphone, which is still coming into the same ear that you're listening, Mike Mandel, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. So thanks for tuning in, and make sure you head on over to our website to get a copy of the Brain Software ebook. Mike Mandel, 1 L in Mandel, hypnosis.com. And we will see you again in podcast 124 coming up next.
Thanks again.
And good night!
Mr. Thompson, I will tell you a wonderful story of Henry Squatter and the Bout of Insomnia.
No, never heard this one.
It was wonderful. It was in June of 1914, just before everything all wrapped up. And Squatter was rather stressed, and he didn't have a cup of tea with us at supper. It wasn't much of a supper, really, just some plates made of brown paper stapled together and dipped in vinegar, upon which we had some sandwiches made of brown paper dipped in vinegar. And we were sitting there, and Bryce Morgan went to pour a cup of tea for Squatter. He said, no, Bryce Morgan, I can't do that. He said, why not, old son? He said, I find if I have any caffeine at night, I just can't sleep. He said, you don't that in your stressful state, old boy. He said, I really don't. I'm not sleeping well. All the bombing and the gas attacks and so on. And Bryce Morgan said, well, here, I've got a nice treat for you. He said, I've just got this brought in from Paris. He brought out a 1 pound block of chocolate. I can't even imagine it must have cost 20 pounds. And he said to Squatter, I want you to have this. He said, Bryce Morgan, I've not had chocolate in 2 years. He said, could I really have? He said, yes, only if you eat it now. Well, of course, the damn thing's loaded with caffeine. Squatter doesn't know. Eats this. He's had the equivalent of about 40 cups of tea. His eyes were so wide, and he had this horrific look on his face. And I remember Johnny Leif Himniot's woe. He just laughed so much he fell into the fire. It wasn't much of a fire, really, just some bits of brown paper stapled together and dipped in vinegar. But we were all having a wonderful laugh at this, but they put him in the infirmary. It was such an overdose. He wasn't well at all, and he got horrendous diarrhea from the chocolate, which made it all funnier, of course. It's nothing mean-spirited, all just funny, good humor. And while he was in the hospital, the doctor said, some idiot's given this chap a lot of caffeine. He's going to be awake for days. I'm going to have to tranquilize him. So they banged an IV lead into his arm and put a bottle there. And as soon as the doctor went out of the room, Bryce Morgan switched it for a flask of coffee. He was taking coffee in intravenously. Funniest damn thing, it almost killed him.